England go into the 2022 World Cup as the only team to have reached the semi-finals of the last two major tournaments, namely Euro 2020 and the 2018 World Cup. Of course, England failed to win either the World Cup or the Euros, losing to Croatia in extra time in 2018 in the semi-finals, and to Italy on penalties in the final in 2021, but it is a level of consistency without peer within the international game over the past two tournaments. And it is reflected in England's odds as the fifth favourites to win the World Cup in Qatar, priced at around 7 or 8 to 1. Those are the positives. On the flip side, England are not in good form going into this World Cup, without a win in any of their last 6 matches, which included a 4-0 drubbing at the hands of Hungary, who didn't even manage to qualify for this World Cup, and they were just relegated from League A of the UEFA Nations League. Added to that, England have several fitness or injury concerns, already without Reece James and Ben Chilwell. Meanwhile, Kyle Walker and Calvin Phillips will both be on the plane, but won't have played much football in Phillips' case, or any in Walker's, for Manchester City in recent months. Then you have got the uncertainty surrounding Harry Maguire, whose poor form has led to him getting dropped by Manchester United, and he also made mistakes during the last international break for England, but there is no obvious replacement for him at centre-back. Throw in the dilemma about which system Southgate will deploy, whether to start Foden or Saka, or both, and to drop Raheem Sterling, the ongoing precariousness of Trent Alexander-Arnold's status within this England squad, and the sense that Southgate doesn't know how to get the best out of his assortment of attacking options, and it feels as though there is an awful lot of uncertainty about what to expect of England, both in terms of performances and results, going into this World Cup. Now that we know England's 26-man squad for the 2022 World Cup though, I wanted to try and analyse England's prospects at this World Cup, taking a look at their potential tournament path and contemplating their strengths, weaknesses, and ultimately, their overall prospects in Qatar. I made a very similar video to this one ahead of Euro 2020, in which, as I remember it at least, I got everything pretty much spot on. But you know what they say, lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place, so this will probably be a load of old twaddle from start to finish that ages worse than Jonathan Gullis, the 32-year-old Conservative MP for Stoke-on-Trent. As you can see very clearly from this Google search though, that saying is actually a myth, and lightning can indeed strike twice in the same place repeatedly, especially if it is a tall and isolated object. Well, I'm about 6 foot, and I've nothing other than a microphone with me standing naked in the middle of a field in rural Texas right now, so I figured that it was worth a go. The first big concern about England heading into this World Cup, that we might as well address right off the bat, is what colour is Phil Foden going to dye his hair? No, not really. It's England's terrible form. As I said in the introduction, England are winless in their last 6 internationals, which is their longest run without a win since 1993, and their longest ever going into a major tournament. It's doubly unusual for this particular England team, since the 1-0 defeat to Hungary, which began this run of 6 games without a win back in June, brought an end to England's longest ever unbeaten run of 22 games. Since then, England have drawn 1-1 with Germany, 0-0 with Italy, lost 4-0 to Hungary, lost 1-0 to Italy, and drew 3-0 with Germany in their most recent fixture. That run of form led to England deservedly getting relegated from Group A of the UEFA Nations League, and it has led to some understandable concerns about England's prospects going into the World Cup. Certainly, if you were Iran, Wales, or the USA, you would have to take some confidence from what can only be described as a major drop-off from this England team. To be perfectly honest though, and I know that this might sound a bit odd, England's poor form doesn't really bother me. For most of my lifetime, England have been the masters of winning meaningless games and have crumbled when it actually mattered. Fabio Capello had an outstanding win percentage as England boss, emerging victorious from 66.7% of his matches in charge of the 3 Lions, a record which included victories against the likes of Germany, Croatia and Spain. But everyone hated him, and He only led England into one major tournament, where we barely scraped through a rubbish group, finished behind the United States, before getting battered by Germany in the first knockout stage. This England team, on the other hand, went into the 2018 World Cup with the lowest expectations of any England team at any World Cup, and reached England's first World Cup semi-final since 1990, and they followed that up 3 years later, admittedly with slightly higher expectations this time around, by reaching England's first final of a major tournament since 1966, and first ever final of the Euros. There were similar doubts around England's form going into Euro 2020, following defeats to Belgium and Denmark in the Nations League, but I always felt confident that the players that England have got would turn up when it mattered. I'm less confident going into this World Cup than I was going into the Euros, but that is because of question marks about the England defence and other issues that we are about to move on to, and not because of some shoddy results in the Nations League. I think this England team is built well for tournaments. They seem to relish the pressure and enjoy being in the close proximity of one another in base camp for a month. They have got some big characters, and they can produce some big moments when they matter most, even when they're not playing their best, almost free-flowing football. It's also worth noting that the England team that performs so poorly in most of those Nations League ties, and the England team that will start against Iran at the World Cup, are two very different football teams. If we take the experimental England team that lost 4-0 to Hungary, just as one example, it is likely that only 3 of that starting 11 will actually start against Iran, possibly 4 at the absolute most, and probably in a completely different formation. There was no Jordan Pickford, no Declan Rice, no Raheem Sterling. These are all huge players for England. I'm not justifying losing 4-0 to Hungary, just so that we're clear. That was a dreadful result in a freak football match, where Hungary buried virtually every sight-on goal that they had. I would just be wary about trying to trace England's Nations League results and performances onto their World Cup results and performances with a 1-to-1 ratio. Whilst poor form is something that a lot of people are concerned about with England, but that I'm not, England's group is something that most people don't seem remotely concerned about, but that I think could be really tough. Sure, there is no Argentina or Brazil, but there are also no gimmies like Panama, like there was for England in 2018, or a Saudi Arabia, or dare I say, even an Australia, as England could have drawn at this World Cup. The USA have by far the best team that they have ever had, Wales have an incredible spirit and resilience about them, and Iran are a really difficult team to break down, who will be brilliantly organised by Alex Ferguson's former assistant Carlos Queiroz, and they are in really good form. Wales are by far the toughest pot 4 opponents that England could possibly have drawn, statistically speaking at least, ranked 19th in the FIFA World Rankings, ahead of the likes of Serbia and Japan. The next highest ranked team in pot 4 was Costa Rica, all the way down in 31st. Iran are actually one place below Wales in the rankings, despite having been in pot 3 in the World Cup draw, but that still makes them the second strongest pot 3 team that England could possibly have drawn at this World Cup, as per the FIFA World Rankings, trailing only Senegal. Even the United States, whilst there were certainly tougher pot 2 opponents that England could have drawn, are still ranked 16th in the FIFA World Rankings and have only lost 2 of their last 22 games. I don't expect England to win all 3 of their group games therefore, although I don't have any specific inkling as to where they are likely to slip up, and I do think that they will progress, even from a group, with no easy games. Iran is the most important game, I think, as England's opening game, dismissed as cannon fodder by a lot of England fans, despite the fact that they have lost just 2 games in the last 2 years, a run which has included victories against both Uruguay and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and a 1-1 draw with Senegal. Iran are one of the most well-organised national teams in the entire world. They'll deploy an extremely low block. Carlos Queiroz will try to ruin any flow to that football match and make it one of the most tedious games you have ever watched in your life, and England will have to come up with the answers to try and unlock their back line. If England can score first, and Iran are forced to come out and commit men forward a little bit more, that is when England will have the opportunity to open them up and to really kill the game. And I think that will be a similar story of that first goal being all important, and when it's scored, for England in the group stage. It is because of the rigid and most likely very defensive systems that England are likely to come up against that there is a possibility that Gareth Southgate will deviate from his preferred system of a back three or a back five, depending upon how you like to define that formation, and switch to a back four in some of those group games. That's exactly what he did at the Euros, playing a back four in the group stage to try and break down Croatia, Scotland and the Czech Republic, before switching to a 3 or 5 at the back against Germany in the round of 16, a back 4 once again against Ukraine in the quarterfinals, a 4 against Denmark again in the semis, and then back to a 3 in the final against Italy, so it is something that he has precedent for doing. I think the fact that he went with a 3 at the back with 2 wing-backs in England's last international break before the World Cup, which is also England's last games before the World Cup, so effectively warm-up fixtures, is fairly conclusive evidence that he considers that to be his strongest formation against formidable opposition. Unless, of course, you think that he was just going for some really elaborate double bluff and playing 4D chess. I don't. I don't actually buy the whole a back 3 or back 5 is too defensive argument, given that almost all good teams now play with a back 3 in possession and a back 5 out of possession, but nonetheless, the personnel that would make up those 3 or 5 is different depending upon the system that Southgate adopts. If England play a back 4 in that opening game against Iran, you can still expect the fullbacks to adopt really advanced roles high at the pitch in possession, with Declan Rice dropping in just ahead of the 2 centre-backs, acting almost as a sweeper and forming that back 3. If England play a back 5, so to speak, obviously the back 3 will consist of those 3 centre-backs that start, most likely John Stones, Eric Dyer and Harry Maguire, and Declan Rice will be a little bit more advanced when England are in possession of the ball. Personally, against a low block, I would be happy to sacrifice a centre-back, play Rice a little bit deeper, and get an extra creative player, whether that is Mason Mount, James Maddison, Jack Grealish or Phil Foden, into our midfield. And as we have already established, Southgate has illustrated a willingness to do just that in the past. What I don't think that Gareth Southgate will do, as some people have suggested, is treat England's 3 group games as little more than warm-up fixtures to try and figure out new things and to experiment ahead of the knockout stage. That would be an excellent recipe for getting knocked out very early on, just as England did in their last World Cup before Southgate took charge of the team in 2014, finishing dead last in their group. He will be well aware of the challenges that Iran, Wales and the USA pose, and I think that he will be pragmatic in how he approaches each of those games. If England were to win against Iran and the United States, that would give Southgate the freedom and the luxury either to rest a couple of players, given that they are going into this World Cup mid-season with barely a week's rest, or to start to think about the knockout stage in terms of his team selection and formation. But that is, of course, a very big if. In many respects, it is a defensive quandary that underpins Gareth Southgate's most serious selection and system dilemmas. England have gone from having an abundance of very talented centre-backs for a number of years, Rio Ferdinand, John Terry, Sol Campbell, Jonathan Woodgate, Ledley King, Jamie Carragher, and so on, to centre-back actually being their weakest position. That hasn't been borne out at previous tournaments, where John Stones and Harry Maguire have both been excellent, but Stones has tended either not to play at all or to be played at right back so far this season. Maguire has been dropped after making a series of errors at Manchester United, and there are no glaringly obvious replacements for them within this England squad. Stones will start, of that there can be no doubt, and I suspect that Maguire will start alongside him, either in a 4 or in a 5. I think that they will be Southgate's preferred 2 in a 4 because they have played together so often for England, they have done a really good job, and they seem to work well in a partnership. And I think that they will both start in a 5, unless Cal Walker was fit enough to start, in which case Southgate could play Stones, Dyer and Walker and leave Maguire out. Personally, I would start Ben White, certainly on the right side of a 3 and probably even in a 4, but I'm not the England manager, so what I think matters little. Kieran Trippier is basically nailed on, I think, at either right back or right wing back. either in a 4 or in a 5, ahead of Trent Alexander-Arnold. And I've no real qualms about that. Alexander-Arnold has been out of this world for a few years at Liverpool, but he is currently in the worst form of his career. Trippier is in his best, and Alexander-Arnold has never really been a big player for England, whereas Trippier has, having been England's best player, a lot of people tend to forget, at the last World Cup. Against the really top teams, if England do come up against them, I could even see Ben White starting at right back if we were to play a 4, and I also wouldn't have too many complaints about that. At left back, it will be Luke Shaw, as it would have been even if Ben Chilwell hadn't got injured. Again, I have seen some people speculate that Southgate might start Trippier at left back or left wing back and Trent on the right, but I would be very surprised if he did that. The reality is, however you move them around, and you can debate about this until the cows come home, England simply do not have a formidable defence. I would argue that they don't have a single world-class defender. They have a good right-back in Trippier, an outstanding attacking fullback who is completely out of form in Alexander-Arnold, a good left-back in Shaw, a good centre-back who isn't playing that much in Stones, an out-of-sorts Maguire who hasn't been playing at all, Ben White who has been playing but has only won 4 caps for England, Connor Cody who I just can't see getting on the pitch, and Dyer who plays in a 3 for Spurs and has been admittedly quite good this season but did also make a mistake against Liverpool. Some people argue that if you have got weak centre-backs, as England do, then you should play fewer of them, hence a back 4, whilst others say that if you have got weak centre-backs, as England do, then you need 3 of them in order to mask their deficiencies, within a back 5. I'm not particularly convinced by either of those arguments, but I do think that if it is to be a 5, which I suspect that it will be, at least if England get out of the group, then Kyle Walker returning would make a whole world of difference, and he could be the key to shoring up that England backline. There is a danger, in a back 5, that England gets overrun in midfield, which is something that you never want, but you especially don't want it in the desert heat of Doha. Jude Bellingham and Declan Rice are both outstanding players, probably 2 of the best 4 or 5 players in this entire England squad, but there is only so much that a 2-man midfield, unless they are prime N'Golo Kante and Xavi, can do up against a 3 or even a diamond. That's why, as I said in a recent video on the squad and 11 that I would personally pick, I'd go with a 3-4-1-2 rather than a 3-4-3, even when playing with a back 5, so that you could play either Phil Foden, Mason Mount, or whomever it might be, in that number 10 role, which would not only strengthen England's numbers both in and out of possession in midfield, it would also suit those players better than playing out wide, in my eyes, but once again, he won't do that, so it is entirely irrelevant. I do think that the fear of getting overrun in midfield, and Declan Rice and Jude Bellingham getting run ragged in the Qatari heat, is part of the reason why Gareth Southgate has picked Conor Gallagher in his squad, who was probably the most surprising inclusion out of his 26, since we saw particularly during his time at Crystal Palace that Gallagher can run for days, he is a workhorse off the ball, and he has that bit of spark both on and off the ball. I think the fact that he's only 22 and Southgate sees him as part of his plans long term and wants him to get that feel of a major tournament is also a factor. But late on in games, up against some tired legs in midfield and with some tired legs on his own team, Gallagher's energy could make a real difference, both if England are looking to get a goal and to get back into a game, and particularly if they're just trying to see a game out. One thing that you have to say about this England team is that whoever starts, they will have the luxury of real quality options, at least in forward areas, to come off the bench and change a game at the right moments, and that is something that not a lot of teams have. It's something that Gareth Southgate spoke about in his press conference when announcing his squad for the World Cup, and it is getting those really big decisions right in terms of who and when to make those changes in games that will be where Southgate earns his money and where games are won or lost for England. James Maddison, Marcus Rashford, Callum Wilson, Jack Grealish and Bukayo Saka are all likely to start that opening game against Iran on the bench, amongst many others, and all offer something radically different were they to be introduced. Maddison has magic in his boots to decide a game in an instant and open up the opposition. Rashford is lightning quick and devastating on the counter-attack, and he looks to be really firing at the moment. Wilson is in tremendous form this season and will keep both centre-backs constantly occupied. Grealish is among the most gifted players in this England squad and is without peer in terms of progressing the ball into the opposition's box. And Saka has been electric for Arsenal so far this season, just as he always has been for England. I don't think that Gareth Southgate knows his best starting 11, his best front 3, or his best front 4, depending upon the system. I think that he wants to get Saka, Sterling and Foden all into the same team, but he knows that he can't do that, certainly not within a back 5, and not against any world-class opposition. England's defence is simply too weak to play that many offensive players, which is why I still think that it will be Sterling, Kane and either Foden or Saka to start if it is a 5 at the back, and Sterling, Kane, Foden or Saka, and Mount if it is a 4. So that is what I expect from England in terms of systems, personnel and their opposition, but what about actual results? And what would constitute a quote-unquote good tournament for England? Well, my full World Cup predictions video is still to come on this channel, but I do think that England will get out of their group, even if it is a little bit tougher than a lot of people anticipate, especially if they fail to get an early goal in those games. Then they will face either the winners or the runners-up, depending upon where we finish in our group, from Group A, which is the weakest group of the tournament, and I would give England a decent chance against any of those teams, even the Netherlands. Then you are looking at a quarter-final, supposing that England win that game, against France, if England were to win their group, or Argentina if they were runners-up, either of which, assuming it is either of those, and there are obviously lots of variables and outcomes where it wouldn't be, but either way, you are most likely looking at an extremely difficult game where England's opponents will be the favourites at the quarter-final stage. For that reason, I think that if England reach the semi-finals again, that would be a really good achievement. And obviously, anything beyond that would be spectacular. If I had to put my life on it, I'd say that England will probably fall in the quarter-finals, just because they are likely to meet a really formidable opponent there, who will probably just have a little bit more quality than them. But as I said going into the Euros 18 months ago, I don't get the impression that this England team will buckle. I think that they will give anyone a good game, and that to beat them, the opposition will have to turn up and put in a good performance. If Germany, Brazil, Argentina, France or Spain play at their absolute best and reach their full potential, they will probably beat England, whatever England do. But there is always a favourite that self-destructs at a tournament, and there's always games where teams aren't quite at the races. So whilst the quarters would be my best guess, I wouldn't write England off against anyone at this World Cup. So that is it for today's video. I hope that you enjoyed it. Hopefully it is hopefully it isn't accurate at all and England win, because, you know, that'd be nice. If you did enjoy today's video, hit the like button. Let me know your thoughts, both on England and just generally about day-to-day issues down below in the comments. And make sure that you are subscribed, of course, and have notifications turned on for HITC Sevens. You can also find me on Twitter or on Instagram via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so. Cheers.